to 20 forgotten foods from the 1970s we want back. Some flavors never leave your memory, only your dinner table. The 1970s served up dishes as bold as the era itself, and many have quietly vanished with time. In this video, we're bringing back 20 forgotten foods from the 70s that deserve another chance to shine. Deviled eggs. There was a time when no family table felt complete without a plate of deviled eggs resting at its center, neatly arranged, dusted with paprika, and brimming with anticipation. In the 1970s, this humble dish was more than just an appetizer. It was a familiar face at birthdays, church suppers, and every potluck in between. The preparation was an art passed down from kitchen to kitchen. Boil the eggs just right, slice them with care, and blend the yolks with a touch of mayo, a hint of mustard, and spices chosen by instinct, not measurement. Their creamy centers and tangy flavor offered a comfort as dependable as the old Tupperware they were served in. Part of their magic came from their simplicity. Anyone could make them, and everyone loved them. A dozen could be whipped up for a couple of dollars, making them as economical as they were crowd-pleasing. And somehow, despite changing tastes and trends, deviled eggs never truly left us. They're still showing up, quietly, proudly, at gatherings where stories are told and laughter is shared. They're not just a recipe. Watergate Salad. They say history has a flavor, and sometimes it's minty green with a swirl of nostalgia. Not many people realize this, but Watergate Salad wasn't named by chefs or food critics. It likely got its name from a cheeky marketing push by home cooks and food writers in the wake of a political storm that rocked the nation. The name stuck, and so did the dessert. It quickly found its way to potluck tables, baby showers, and summer picnics, carried in neon-tinted Tupperware and topped with pride. With canned pineapple, pistachio pudding mix, mini marshmallows, and whipped topping, it came together like a patchwork quilt, unexpected but strangely harmonious. The ingredients were simple and easy to find, making it a reliable treat when time or money was tight. What gave it staying power, though, wasn't just convenience. It was the way it lightened a room, sparked conversation, and left a sugary smile on faces both young and old. Today, you might still find it hiding between more modern desserts during the holidays, quietly keeping its place. And when you take that first creamy bite, it carries more than flavor. It carries the echo of laughter, Formica countertops, and a different kind of sweetness. Ambrosia Salad. Did dessert ever look like a rainbow exploded in a bowl? If you grew up in the 1970s, chances are you remember Ambrosia Salad, not because it was fancy, but because it showed up everywhere, dressed in whipped cream and confidence. It was the kind of dish that didn't apologize for being a little weird. Canned fruit cocktail, shredded coconut, pastel mini marshmallows, and a generous cloud of whipped topping, all stirred together like some magical pantry experiment gone right. You'd see it on plastic-covered picnic tables at church functions, in glass bowls at grandma's holiday spread, and always beside someone's Jell-O mold. It was sweet, soft, and just a little bit nostalgic with every bite. What made Ambrosia special wasn't the ingredients, but the feeling. It was a dessert that said, "This is what celebration looks like." It didn't cost much to make, maybe a few dollars at most, but it always felt festive. While it's drifted out of fashion in today's trendier kitchens, some families still dust off the recipe now and then. Because sometimes what we miss isn't just the food, but the moments that came with it. Tab Cola. Back in the day, if you wanted to feel healthy and rebellious at the same time, you cracked open a can of Tab. It was the drink of choice for folks who still wanted their fizzy fix, but were starting to eye sugar with suspicion. Introduced by Coca-Cola in the early 70s, Tab wasn't just a soda, it was a statement. With its bold pink label and slightly bitter edge, thanks to saccharin, it became an instant hit among diet-conscious trendsetters, particularly women flipping through fashion magazines or chatting over backyard fences. At just 10 cents a can, it felt futuristic and affordable all at once. But as tastes changed and newer, flashier diet sodas took over supermarket shelves, Tab quietly slipped into the background. By 2020, Coca-Cola gave it the final goodbye, ending a decades-long love affair that still lingers in the memories of those who remember its sharp snap and almost medicinal bite. While you won't find it next to today's sparkling water cans, Tab still holds a fizzy little place in pop culture, forever tied to a time when going sugar-free felt like stepping boldly into the future with teased hair and shoulder pads. Was there a dish from the 70s you didn't like as a kid, but miss now? Rumaki. I still remember the first time I saw Rumaki on a toothpick. My Aunt Margie handed it to me at one of her famous backyard luau's. "Just try it," she said, with that wink that meant trouble or treasure. "It looks strange, wrapped in bacon, like a tiny secret. But the taste? Unforgettable. That perfect mix of crispy, salty, and sweet crunch left me stunned and a little hooked." Rumaki quickly became a star at cocktail parties, potlucks, and New Year's Eve gatherings, often sharing the spotlight with deviled eggs and towering trays of hors d'oeuvres. The unlikely trio of water chestnuts, chicken livers, and bacon created a flavor explosion that seemed daring yet familiar. Best of all, it was easy on the wallet. With a few basic ingredients, anyone could whip up a batch that impressed even the pickiest guests. As food fads shifted toward lighter, flashier fare, Rumaki began to slip quietly from party menus. Yet for those who remember that first smoky, savory bite, it's never truly disappeared. Every now and then, a platter appears, and with it comes the unmistakable spark of old gatherings, laughter under string lights, and a taste of something wonderfully bold. Fondue Bourguignonne. Few meals ever turned dinner into an experience quite like Fondue Bourguignonne. The moment that pot of hot oil hit the table, something shifted. Conversations grew livelier, laughter got louder, and suddenly, everyone had a fork in hand and a story to tell. Fondue nights brought a kind of easy excitement, where chunks of beef sizzled in bubbling oil and plates filled up with colorful dipping sauces, sharp mustard blends, creamy herbed mixtures, and fiery chutneys that dared you to double dip. Hosting a fondue dinner didn't require much: a decent cut of meat, a handful of sauces, and a willingness to linger over a meal. Bell-bottoms brushed against shag carpets, records spun funky tunes, and fondue forks clinked in the pot like a symphony of good company. Though its heyday has passed, Fondue Bourguignonne occasionally finds its way back to the table, at retro parties, cozy mountain lodges, or among friends who crave something a little slower and more social. The first pop and hiss of oil still carries a certain magic, stirring up not just dinner, but a whole room's worth of laughter, conversation, and a reminder that sometimes the best meals are the ones you cook together. Taco salad. Do you remember the first time you saw a salad served in a bowl you could actually eat? Taco salad burst onto American dinner tables like a piñata full of color, crunch, and excitement. As Mexican-inspired dishes captured imaginations, this playful creation quickly earned its place in family kitchens and potluck spreads from coast to coast. There was pure joy in layering seasoned ground beef, crisp lettuce, ripe tomatoes, shredded cheese, and crumbling tortilla chips into a golden fried shell that shattered delightfully with each bite. Affordable and easy to assemble, it offered families a festive meal without straining their budgets. $2 to $4 could create a feast lively enough to brighten any evening. Restaurants soon caught on, adding their own twists and cementing taco salad as a menu favorite. Over time, variations blossomed, from lighter, health-conscious takes to extra-hearty versions that piled ingredients sky-high. Yet through every evolution, the spirit of taco salad stayed true, a celebration of flavor, texture, and a little bit of edible fun. Even now, one crunchy bite is enough to stir up memories of paper plates, backyard laughter, and nights when dinner felt more like a party than a routine. Hamburger Helper. Before meal kits and grocery delivery apps were even a twinkle in Silicon Valley's eye, there was Hamburger Helper, America's original 5 o'clock lifesaver. With just a pound of ground beef and that unmistakable red box, dinner practically made itself. Toss in some noodles, a flavor packet that could wake up even the blandest pan, and you had a steaming bowl of cheeseburger mac or beef stroganoff in no time. Few people realize Hamburger Helper was born out of necessity, a clever answer to a nationwide meat shortage. Stretching 1 pound of beef to feed a family felt like pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and all for about 50 cents a box. Across neighborhoods lined with station wagons and swinging screen doors, kitchens buzzed with the familiar aroma, while hungry kids clattered forks and set the table. Over time, the packaging evolved, and new flavors crowded the shelves, but the essential spirit never faded. That little glove on the box promised more than just a meal. It promised a moment of ease, a sense that dinner could be simple, hearty, and ready before the evening news finished. And for many families, it delivered exactly that, night after busy night. Beef stroganoff. Creamy, savory, and just fancy enough to impress the neighbors. Beef stroganoff had a way of making any weeknight dinner feel like a special occasion. The dish arrived on American tables with a European flair, but it didn't take long for it to feel like home. You'd start by browning tender strips of beef, then fold them into a velvety mix of mushrooms, onions, and sour cream that coated everything with rich, comforting warmth. Served over wide egg noodles or a bed of rice, it was the kind of meal that filled the house with that unmistakable aroma of something worth sitting down for. Stroganoff wasn't just for dinner parties. It became a go-to for busy parents who needed something hearty yet manageable, especially with boxed versions making it even more accessible. And despite how simple the ingredients were, beef, cream, mushrooms, it always felt like a little step up from the everyday. Some families added Worcestershire, others a splash of wine or paprika, giving each version a personal twist. While trends have come and gone, this dish quietly held its ground. Even today, a good stroganoff can bring back memories of thick drapes, clinking forks, and that one night when nobody argued at the table. Shrimp cocktail. Whatever happened to the appetizer that made you feel like you were dining first class, right at home? Shrimp cocktail once carried an effortless elegance, appearing at weddings, anniversaries, and those special dinner parties where even the good china made an appearance. A tall glass rimmed with cold pink shrimp, a bowl of bold, tangy cocktail sauce in the center. It was a simple setup, yet somehow it felt indulgent. Add a lemon wedge, a sprig of parsley, and you had a centerpiece that whispered sophistication without trying too hard. The best part? It didn't cost a fortune. For about $1.50, hosts could impress guests with something that looked and tasted extravagant. Over time, as food trends turned toward artistic plating and exotic ingredients, shrimp cocktail quietly receded into the background. Yet it never completely vanished. At retro-themed steakhouses and nostalgic gatherings, this classic still makes a grand entrance, chilled, gleaming, and ready to transport diners to a time when appetizers were bold and unmistakably celebratory. One bite, and suddenly, memories come rushing back. The clink of cocktail glasses, linen napkins, and the simple thrill of something that felt just a little bit fancy. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more vintage vibes. Cheese balls. Cheese balls didn't need fancy plating or gourmet ingredients to make an impression. They just showed up, rolled in chopped nuts and full of confidence. At every gathering, from New Year's Eve to Grandma's Bridge Club, there, it sat in the middle of the table like a retro crown jewel. People didn't whisper about calories. They grabbed a cracker, scooped a hearty helping, and smiled like they were in on a delicious little secret. Inside that creamy mix of cheddar and cream cheese lived something richer than flavor: familiarity, tradition, and often the quiet pride of a family recipe shared through the years. Adaptability was part of its charm. A dash of garlic for boldness, a sprinkle of herbs for color, maybe a handful of crushed pineapple for a sweet twist. It could shift to fit any mood. And making one? Laughably simple. A mixing bowl, a sturdy spoon, and a little bit of heart were all you needed. For just a few dollars, you had a centerpiece that invited conversation and second helpings. While modern spreads chase elegance, every now and then a humble cheese ball rolls onto the scene, reminding everyone that comfort sometimes wears a crunchy coat of chopped pecans. Carrot cake. That first bite always brought a quiet kind of joy. Carrot cake had a way of sneaking up on you, not too flashy, never overly sweet, but full of heart. It showed up at birthday parties, office potlucks, and Easter brunches, always topped with a thick layer of cream cheese frosting that clung like velvet to your fork. Beneath it, a dense, moist crumb speckled with flecks of orange and just the right amount of spice. Raisins, crushed pineapple, maybe even chopped walnuts. Each family had their own spin. What made it unforgettable was how it felt both indulgent and oddly wholesome, like a dessert you could almost justify. Carrots and cake? Why not? It felt like the kind of treat that grandmothers baked and kids devoured without ever questioning its ingredients. And you didn't need to break the bank to enjoy it. A single slice cost pocket change, but offered a flavor that lingered long after. Over time, it quietly slipped out of the spotlight, edged aside by glossier, trendier sweets. Yet for those who remember its humble charm, carrot cake still carries the warmth of kitchen counters, afternoon sunlight, and the sweet simplicity of desserts that didn't need to impress. They just needed to be real. Zucchini bread. Who would have thought a garden vegetable could find its way into dessert and still feel like a warm hug from home? Zucchini bread was one of those quiet marvels that appeared on kitchen counters during a time when health food started mingling with homemade comfort. It didn't shout for attention, but it won hearts, one moist slice at a time. Grated zucchini brought unexpected softness to the crumb, while walnuts added crunch and chocolate chips snuck in for those who couldn't resist a little sweetness. It was the kind of recipe passed between neighbors, scribbled on index cards, shared in community cookbooks, and baked in loaf pans that had seen generations. It felt wholesome, not in a self-righteous way, but in a down-to-earth, let's make the most of what the garden gives us kind of spirit. And it wasn't expensive to make, just a few basic pantry staples and a couple of zucchinis that might have otherwise gone to waste. As other food trends came and went, this humble loaf stuck around. You'll still find it wrapped in wax paper at bake sales, or cooling on wire racks in quiet kitchens. Zucchini bread isn't flashy, but it endures. Quiche Lorraine. No dish ever made you feel quite as fancy as pulling a golden quiche Lorraine out of the oven and pretending just for a moment that you were cooking in a little French cottage, even if your actual kitchen had avocado green appliances and shag carpet nearby. This savory pie had just enough flair to impress the in-laws without making anyone break a sweat. With its flaky crust, rich custard of eggs and cream, a handful of cheese, and crisp bacon tucked inside, it struck the perfect balance between home-style comfort and a touch of continental charm. The name alone, Quiche Lorraine, seemed to glide across the tongue, conjuring images of berets and clinking wine glasses. Hosting a dinner with quiche on the menu hinted that you had a worldly flair, even if you were serving it off a Formica countertop. The ingredients themselves were humble, but together, they created something that quietly whispered sophistication. As food fashions leaned toward more elaborate or minimalist creations, quiche quietly retreated from the spotlight. Yet every now and then, it resurfaces, warm, buttery, and full of quiet pride, reminding diners that true classics never really fade. They simply wait for their next perfect moment. Pineapple chicken. Not every dish could pull off sweet and savory in one bite, but pineapple chicken made it look easy. Long before fusion cuisine became a buzzword, this colorful classic was bridging flavor worlds, serving up tender chunks of chicken glazed in a sticky sweet sauce, dancing with juicy pineapple and bright bell peppers. It wasn't fancy, but it was bold, and it brought a little tropical sunshine to family dinners across America. Whether it came from a skillet in a modest kitchen or a buffet line at a Chinese-American restaurant, it delivered comfort and zing in equal measure. Recipes varied. Some cooks added soy sauce, others a splash of vinegar or ginger, but the heart of it stayed the same. You could feed the whole family for just a few bucks and still feel like dinner had something a little special. Over the years, as food trends got fancier and plating got prettier, pineapple chicken faded into the background. But it never vanished completely. You'll still find it tucked into old cookbooks or making a surprise comeback at nostalgic diners. And every now and then, when that unmistakable aroma fills the air, it brings back more than hunger. It brings back memories. Is there a vintage recipe from your childhood that you still make today? Eggs Benedict. Is there any dish that says Lazy Sunday louder than a plate of Eggs Benedict? With its rich layers and delicate balance, this breakfast classic brought a touch of elegance to even the humblest kitchen. It started with a toasted English muffin, warm and crisp. Then came a generous slice of ham, or sometimes bacon if you were feeling adventurous, topped with a gently poached egg that trembled like a secret waiting to be discovered. The crowning glory was always the hollandaise sauce, silky and bright, poured lovingly over the top until every layer glistened. This wasn't the kind of breakfast tossed together on a rushed weekday. It was meant for mornings when the coffee brewed slower, when newspapers rustled softly, and there was no clock ticking you out the door. A plate cost around $2 to $3, feeling like a small luxury without emptying pockets. Over time, creative twists have popped up. Avocado slices, crab cakes, even smoked salmon. But the soul of the dish still feels remarkably intact. Eggs Benedict carries with it the spirit of real silverware, polished tables, and conversations that meandered without deadlines. Chicken Kiev. Some dishes wear tuxedos even when served on paper plates, and chicken Kiev was one of them. This golden, crisp-coated beauty looked elegant on the outside, but the real thrill came when your fork broke the surface, and that rich, garlicky butter flowed out like a surprise encore. Every bite felt like a tiny celebration, a small, buttery spectacle tucked inside a simple chicken breast. The ingredients were modest, just chicken, butter, breadcrumbs, and a little patience. But the result always felt far grander than the effort. Home cooks could pull off something that felt restaurant-worthy right in their own kitchens, even if the decor leaned more toward shag rugs than starched linens. It wasn't unusual for Chicken Kiev to make an appearance on special occasions, birthdays, anniversaries, or Sunday dinners that called for just a little extra sparkle. And the best part? Enjoying it didn't require a fancy occasion or a fat wallet. Whether plated at home or ordered at a neighborhood restaurant for under $5, it offered everyday luxury without the airs. Though it eventually drifted off menus, its spirit lives on. Every so often, it makes a triumphant return, crispy, buttery, and bold. Harvey Wallbanger cake. Every now and then, a cake comes along that doesn't just sit on the dessert table. It steals the spotlight, plays the room, and leaves behind a sweet little scandal. That's exactly what the Harvey Wallbanger cake did. Named after the popular cocktail of the same name, this groovy creation packed a 1-2 punch of citrus and liqueur that felt more like a party than a pastry. with Galliano lending its herbal sweetness and a splash of orange juice cutting through with brightness. It was the kind of cake that turned heads at Tupperware parties, potlucks, and bridge nights. You didn't just bake it, you unveiled it. And while the ingredients weren't complicated, a boxed mix, pudding, eggs, and a boozy twist, the result felt like a slice of the unexpected. It was affordable too, just a couple bucks for a dessert that made you look like you knew your way around a bundt pan. Over time, as frosting towers and fondant flowers took over the baking scene, this golden beauty faded into the background. But ask any nostalgic baker, and they'll tell you, it still lives on. Swedish meatballs. Warm kitchens, clinking forks, and the gentle hum of family conversation. Swedish meatballs fit right into that picture. These savory bites made their mark long before flat-pack furniture became their unofficial ambassador. Blended from ground beef and pork, seasoned just right with hints of nutmeg and pepper, and browned to a golden finish, they brought both substance and comfort to the table. What made them unforgettable wasn't just the creamy gravy they swam in, or the buttery mashed potatoes that often played sidekick. It was how they turned a simple meal into something that felt special. A spoonful of tart lingonberry jam added just the right contrast, balancing richness with brightness. Back then, a family could prepare a generous helping without stretching the budget, using ingredients already stocked in most kitchens. Over time, Swedish meatballs found their way into potluck spreads, retro cookbooks, and restaurant menus far beyond their Scandinavian roots. They're still with us today, not just because of nostalgia, but because they work, reliable, flavorful, and heartwarming. Frog legs. Glancing back at dinner tables of decades past, frog legs once danced right onto fine china with surprising grace. Often associated with French bistros or Southern supper clubs, these delicate morsels, lightly breaded, gently fried, managed to blur the line between rustic and refined. The taste, reminiscent of a mild blend between chicken and fish, came wrapped in crisp batter, served sizzling from the skillet, and often garnished with nothing more than lemon wedges and a bit of bold conversation. For a time, they weren't just a novelty. They were a culinary talking point. Guests would raise eyebrows, then reach for seconds. And despite the upscale presentation, frog legs were astonishingly affordable, making them a prized centerpiece at dinner parties on a budget. But as the years rolled on, changing palates, growing environmental awareness, and a shift toward more familiar comfort foods sent frog legs quietly hopping off the mainstream menu. Conservation discussions and evolving food ethics nudged them further into obscurity. Still, they linger on the occasional menu or in the pages of weathered cookbooks that capture the adventurous spirit of mid-century dining. Their legacy may be quieter now, but for those who remember, frog legs remain one of those rare dishes that brought a little intrigue, a little boldness, and a lot of flavor to the American plate. Banana flips. There's something about childhood snacks that can take you straight back to sunlit afternoons and playground laughter. Among those sweet treasures lived the banana flip, a snack that turned a simple treat into a tiny adventure. Shaped like a folded taco, it started with a soft, golden banana-flavored cake, tender enough to leave a gentle crumb on your fingertips. Inside, a rich cream filling waited, spilling out just enough with every bite to make things deliciously messy. Brands like Nickel Nip and Mickey's helped make banana flips a lunchtime favorite, slipping them into brown paper bags or offering them as after-school rewards. The bright yellow cake, the playful shape, even the satisfying squish between your hands, it all made snacking feel joyful, almost magical. Banana flips weren't merely about flavor, they stirred up a sense of wonder with every wrapper you peeled back. Though they're harder to find today, the memory still lingers, sweet and golden, like a smile you almost forgot you had. 20 forgotten dinners from the 1970s that have faded into history. Ever wonder what dinner looked like before DoorDash and microwave meals? Back in the 1970s, dinner wasn't just food, it was a reflection of the times. Some dishes were born out of love, others out of necessity, and many have quietly vanished. Today, we're digging into 20 forgotten dinners that once brought families together across America. Let's delve right in. Potato pancakes. There's something about the scent of sizzling potatoes in a pan that can pull you straight back to childhood. I still remember my grandmother standing by the stove on Sunday afternoons, apron dusted with flour, carefully pressing potato pancakes into a cast iron skillet. We didn't have much, but those crisp-edged patties felt like a feast. They weren't just food, they were her way of turning hardship into comfort. Back in the 1970s, many families knew what it meant to stretch a dollar, and potatoes were the hero ingredient of the times. Not only were they cheap, but they could be grown in backyard gardens, traded between neighbors, or pulled from a root cellar long after harvest. And when meat was scarce or bills piled high, folks turned to what they had on hand: shredded spuds, a little onion, maybe an egg, and created something hearty, golden, and unforgettable. While cookbooks of the era overflowed with budget-friendly ideas, few recipes were as adaptable or satisfying as the humble potato pancake. More than a meal, it was a lesson in resilience, proof that even in the toughest years, a hot pan and a handful of potatoes could still bring people together. Hog maw. Have you ever sat at a dinner table, looked down at your plate and thought, "What in the world is this? And why does it smell so good?" That was me at age 10, staring wide-eyed at a slice of hog maw, a dish my great-aunt Ruth swore could cure any bad mood or empty stomach. I didn't know then that I was eating a pig's stomach stuffed with potatoes, onions, and sausage. I just knew it was warm, rich, and tasted like home. Back in the 60s and 70s, when money was tight and waste wasn't an option, hog maw was the kind of meal that made sense. It was hearty, cheap, and made use of every part of the animal. No frills, no fancy cuts, just old-school practicality. Particularly loved in Pennsylvania Dutch country, this dish also found cousins in kitchens around the world, from Vietnamese markets to Southern soul food cookouts. Sure, it's not something you'd serve on a silver platter today, but back then, hog maw was a symbol of survival and pride. It reminded folks that with a little creativity, and maybe a strong stomach, you could turn almost anything into something worth sharing. Fried chicken livers. There was a time in this country when nothing from a chicken went to waste, not even the parts folks today might wrinkle their noses at. Fried chicken livers were a staple in small-town kitchens, especially throughout the South and Midwest, where thrift wasn't a lifestyle choice, it was survival. Long before supermarkets overflowed with boneless breasts and ready-made meals, families knew how to make the most of what they had, and that meant turning humble ingredients into something worth remembering. Chicken livers were cheap, packed with protein, and could feed a hungry household without stretching the wallet. They hit the pan with a sizzle after a soak in milk or salt water, a trick passed down through generations to tame that strong, minerally flavor. Coated in seasoned flour or cornmeal and fried until golden, they came out crisp on the outside, creamy inside, and full of bold character. What made them truly special, though, was their adaptability. Every region had its own twist, whether marinated in buttermilk, dressed with hot sauce, or nestled into a biscuit. Fried chicken livers weren't just food. They were proof that working-class cooking, at its best, could be both honest and unforgettable. Oysters. Rockefeller. Is it really a fancy dinner party if someone doesn't whisper, "Wait, are those oysters?" Few dishes conjure up old-school glamour quite like Oysters Rockefeller, a name that practically demands a bow tie and a flute of champagne. Long before small plates and fusion menus took over, this was the height of culinary sophistication. First created in 1899 at the legendary Antoine's in New Orleans, The dish was named not for its ingredients, but for its richness, a playful nod to John D. Rockefeller, the wealthiest man in America at the time. The original recipe? Still a closely guarded secret. But most versions featured plump oysters nestled in their half shells, topped with a luscious mix of butter, breadcrumbs, chopped greens, usually spinach, and often a hint of licorice-like liqueur. Once assembled, they were broiled just until the topping crackled to golden perfection, creating a contrast between the silky oyster and the crisp, herbaceous crust. Served on a bed of rock salt, with flickering candles and soft jazz in the background, they weren't just food, they were theater. In the 1970s, Oysters Rockefeller stood as a symbol of refined taste and timeless luxury, a forgotten masterpiece from the golden age of American dining. Creamed spinach. Steam rose from the dinner table as the smell of something buttery and faintly nutty drifted through the kitchen, the kind of smell that meant it was time to sit down, hold hands, and say grace. Creamed spinach was never the star of the meal, but somehow it always brought a sense of quiet comfort. I still remember my little sister wrinkling her nose at the sight of anything green, until one bite of that velvety dish changed her mind for good. In the 1970s, creamed spinach found its way into school cafeterias and home kitchens alike, offering a clever way to get children, and sometimes adults, to eat their greens without complaint. The spinach, whether fresh from the garden or pulled from the freezer, was wilted gently, then folded into a sauce made with milk, butter, and a touch of flour. A pinch of nutmeg or garlic added a subtle depth that balanced the earthiness. Served warm, its rich, creamy texture gave the leafy vegetable a makeover, turning something simple into something cozy. Beyond its flavor, it quietly packed in nutrients like iron and vitamin A, becoming both a childhood memory and a quiet hero of the retro dinner plate. Shepherd's pie. Do you remember when a single casserole dish could feed the whole family and still leave enough for tomorrow? Back in the day, especially in blue-collar households, that wasn't just convenience, it was a way of life. Shepherd's pie, hearty and humble, wasn't about impressing dinner guests. It was about stretching leftovers into something that felt like a fresh, home-cooked meal. Traditionally made with lamb in its original British form, the American version leaned heavily on ground beef, or whatever meat happened to be left over from Sunday supper. Toss in a handful of vegetables, pour on some gravy, and crown it with a thick layer of mashed potatoes. Into the oven it went, bubbling and browning until the edges crisped up just right. This dish became a quiet hero in kitchens across the country, especially in the 1970s, when rising prices made frugality a necessity. More than just a meat and potatoes classic, it stood for something larger, a deep-rooted tradition of using what you had and wasting nothing. Shepherd's pie wasn't just dinner, it was thrift, comfort, and cleverness baked into one. And in many ways, it's a dish that still reminds us how creativity often begins with constraint. Click like if you remember any of these dinners, and subscribe for more stories from the good old days. Cheesy ham and broccoli casserole. Was there ever a casserole dish big enough to survive a church potluck without someone sneaking seconds? If you grew up in the 70s or 80s, chances are you've crossed paths with the cheesy ham and broccoli casserole. A dish so rich, so bubbly, it deserved its own holiday. This creamy concoction became a household favorite, not just for its flavor, but for its magical ability to feed a crowd with barely any fuss. Chopped ham and tender broccoli were folded into a velvety cheese sauce, often bulked up with a can of condensed soup. Because let's face it, every kitchen had a few stashed in the pantry. Then came the topping, buttery breadcrumbs or crushed crackers that baked into a golden crust no one could resist. I still remember my aunt showing up to family dinners with that same faded Pyrex dish, the cheese bubbling over the sides like it was trying to escape. It wasn't fancy, but it felt special, like something made with love and just a little improvisation. Cheesy ham and broccoli casserole was more than a meal. It was a shining example of retro resourcefulness, a one-pan wonder that turned simple ingredients into something everyone looked forward to, even if it meant fighting over the last scoop. Pork neck bones with rice. The slow simmer of pork neck bones on the stove was more than just a sound. It was a rhythm, a heartbeat echoing through kitchens built on strength and sacrifice. In many African American households, especially throughout the South, this dish wasn't just sustenance, it was legacy on a plate. Neck bones weren't found in high-end butcher displays, but they were found in homes where people knew how to stretch a dollar without sacrificing flavor. Often overlooked by the wealthy, these cuts were full of collagen, marrow, and soul. Perfect for long, slow cooking that coaxed every bit of goodness from the bone. In the 1970s, pork neck bones paired with rice became a staple for working-class families across America. It was affordable, filling, and deeply rooted in the waste-nothing philosophy that shaped so much of Southern cooking. With onions, garlic, and a few spices, the meat turned tender, falling apart into a rich, savory gravy that soaked beautifully into a mound of white rice. This dish told stories, not just of poverty, but of perseverance, resourcefulness, and flavor born from necessity. Pork neck bones with rice is more than forgotten food. Its heritage passed from pot to plate, generation after generation. Hoppin' John. What better way to welcome a new year than with a bowl full of luck and hope? In Southern kitchens, that's exactly what Hoppin' John offered. Not just a meal, but a blessing served warm, one spoonful at a time. This humble yet deeply meaningful dish has long been tied to tradition, especially in African American and Low Country heritage. Made with black-eyed peas, rice, and seasoned pork, often ham hock, sausage, or fatback, it was a one-pot wonder that brought comfort and symbolism to the table. The peas stood for coins, the greens served alongside symbolized paper money, and the cornbread, golden as the sun, represented wealth itself. Cooked low and slow with onions, garlic, and a touch of spice, Hoppin' John was meant to nourish, stretch, and most of all, bring in prosperity. It wasn't about fancy presentation, it was about soul, community, and good fortune passed down through generations. Though it may not hold the same spotlight as other holiday dishes today, its legacy still lingers. In every simmering pot, you'll find a story, one of resilience, ritual, and the deep belief that a simple meal could shape the days ahead for the better. Hot water, cornbread. Golden edges crackled gently in the skillet as the scent of cornmeal filled the kitchen with a kind of peace no recipe book could teach. Hot water cornbread wasn't flashy or fancy, but in the South, especially through the 1970s, it was a beloved companion to nearly every meal. Born from modest pantries and passed down by memory, it stood as a quiet symbol of resilience. The method was simple, almost meditative. Stir cornmeal with boiling water until it thickens into a stiff, steaming dough. Some added a dash of salt, others a touch of sugar if it was on hand. Then, with practiced hands, the mixture was patted into rustic cakes, no measuring cups, no fuss, and dropped into hot oil or lard, where it browned to perfection with a soft, hearty middle. Families served it alongside collard greens, black-eyed peas, fried chicken, whatever they could pull together that day. And while corn-based breads often carried the stigma of poverty to those who grew up on them, they told a different story, one of creativity, culture, and care. Hot water cornbread wasn't just food, it was pride, pressed by hand and fried with love. What dish from your childhood always makes you feel nostalgic, even if it wasn't fancy? Fried chicken patties. Who else remembers sprinting to the lunch line just to snag the last fried chicken patty? Back in middle school, that golden hockey puck was pure cafeteria gold. I'll never forget the day I traded my fruit cup and a pencil top eraser just to get my friend's extra patty. Totally worth it. By the early 1980s, fried chicken patties had claimed their throne in school lunchrooms across America. Designed to mimic the crisp, familiar bite of fast food, they were a hit with kids who knew good flavor when they tasted it. Made from ground chicken mixed with seasoning, formed into perfect little rounds, then breaded and fried until crunchy outside and juicy inside. They were easy to prep, easy to serve, and even easier to devour. Cafeteria workers loved them because they were efficient. Mix, shape, fry, done. Students loved them because they felt like a fast food treat in the middle of a school day. Served solo or tucked in a soft bun with a side of crinkle fries, they turned an ordinary lunch into something to look forward to. More than just a meal, they became a lunchtime legend, the unofficial currency of cafeteria trades and the star of countless childhood memories. Egg drop soup. Steam curled like soft ribbon above a chipped ceramic bowl, catching the light as if time itself had slowed down. In that moment, sometime in the early 1970s, egg drop soup wasn't just a dish, it was a quiet revelation. While much of American cooking still revolved around casseroles and canned convenience, this simple Chinese staple arrived like a whisper from another world. With clear broth gently seasoned in soy sauce, white pepper, and a trace of sesame oil, the magic happened in a single motion. Ribbons of beaten egg stirred slowly into the heat, creating delicate threads that floated like silk. Served hot, quick, and affordable, it offered a balance of comfort and curiosity, light enough to soothe, rich enough to satisfy. As America's taste buds began to expand beyond the familiar, egg drop soup became one of the first bridges between East and West. It showed up in small-town Chinese takeouts, university cafeterias, and even home kitchens, trying something new. And though it's now as common as ketchup in many places, its quiet impact on 1970s food culture was profound, a gentle invitation into global flavors, served one spoonful at a time. Rice with soy sauce. In a kitchen lit by the soft hum of a single bulb, the gentle clink of a spoon stirring soy sauce into a bowl of warm rice spoke louder than words ever could. No frills, no garnish, just nourishment, quietly filling both body and soul. During the 1970s, as American families adjusted to inflation, fast food, and shifting cultural tides, rice with soy sauce emerged as both a comfort and a revelation. For Asian immigrant households, it was a continuation of what they already knew, that simplicity didn't mean lack. For others, it was an introduction to a new way of eating, shaped by migration, adaptation, and neighborhood exchange. This pairing owed much of its rise to the influence of Asian American communities, whose culinary traditions began to shape the national palate after immigration policies loosened in the mid-1960s. Rice was affordable and versatile. Soy sauce added instant depth. Together, they offered a warm, budget-friendly alternative in a decade increasingly defined by processed shortcuts. Though it may seem unremarkable today, rice with soy sauce once represented the quiet merging of cultures, a dish that required little, but delivered much, and reminded us that flavor often lives in the simplest things we pass down. Pickle sandwiches. Who needs avocado toast when you've got 2 slices of bread and a pickle in the middle, right? Back in the 1970s, no one was chasing trendy lunch hacks or posting sandwich selfies. Food wasn't about flair. It was about getting by, and pickle sandwiches did just that. This bare-bones lunch was common among working-class folks who had more month than money. Pickles were cheap, lasted forever, and packed just enough tang to distract from the fact that, well, there wasn't much else on the plate. Toss one between 2 slices of white bread, maybe a swipe of mustard if payday had come, and you had yourself a meal. Of course, it wasn't considered quirky or health-conscious like it might be today. Back then, it was a quiet signal that someone was scraping by, rationing resources, skipping the meat, and doing what they could with what they had. But it was also a symbol of ingenuity and resilience, wrapped in wax paper and eaten on factory floors, in schoolyards, or inside a parked truck. Though the pickle sandwich has mostly faded from modern menus, its memory lingers, a tart, crunchy bite of the past that reminds us how simplicity once carried more weight than presentation ever could. Vienna sausages and crackers. If you grew up in the 70s, chances are you knew the sound of a Vienna sausage can opening almost as well as the jingle of the ice cream truck. These little meat logs, short, pale, and swimming in salty broth, were the unsung heroes of the lunchbox and the lunch break alike. They weren't glamorous, but that was never the point. In a decade when convenience reigned and time was always in short supply, Vienna sausages stepped up as the ultimate quick fix. Toss them on some saltines, mash them into bread with a squeeze of mustard, or fry them up if you were feeling fancy. They'd still be ready in under 5 minutes. Their appeal lay in their predictability. You knew what you were getting: soft texture, savory flavor, and enough sodium to fuel a factory shift. Whether eaten cold straight from the tin or dressed up like mini hot dogs, they were staple in homes, lunchboxes, and glove compartments. Sure, they've fallen out of favor in today's age of organic everything, but back then, Vienna sausages were survival food with a side of nostalgia, a modest meal that made no promises, yet never let you down. Powdered mashed potatoes. Back in the days when dinner had to be on the table before the 6 o'clock news, powdered mashed potatoes became a quiet revolution. They didn't come from Grandma's garden, but from the pantry, in a box sealed in foil, promising comfort without the chore. Born out of necessity, these instant spuds had humble beginnings in military kitchens and relief programs designed for speed, storage, and scale. But by the 1970s, they had worked their way into everyday American life, thanks to brands like Hungry Jack and Idahoan, who turned powdered starch into something surprisingly satisfying. For families juggling long hours, tight budgets, and hungry kids, these flakes were a lifesaver. Just add hot water and a splash of milk, stir until smooth, maybe toss in some butter, garlic, or cheese, and there you had it. A bowl of warmth, ready in minutes. Sure, they lacked the rustic charm of hand-mashed potatoes, but they had their own kind of magic, convenience without guilt. They were proof that even in an era chasing shortcuts, people still craved that familiar taste of home. Soft, buttery, dependable, served with a side of practicality and a dash of 1970s optimism. Sloppy Joes. By the time the lunch bell rang, you already knew what kind of day it was, just by the smell drifting through the school hallways: tangy, sweet, and unmistakably sloppy. Sloppy Joes weren't elegant, but they didn't need to be. They were loud, saucy, and just messy enough to feel like rebellion in a bun. This beloved American sandwich became a staple in school cafeterias starting in the mid-20th century, peaking in popularity during the 1970s and 80s. The recipe was simple but satisfying. Ground beef sautéed with onions and garlic, simmered in a tomato-based sauce spiked with a dash of Worcestershire, a sprinkle of sugar, and maybe a few secret ingredients depending on who was stirring the pot. Served on a soft hamburger bun, which was often no match for the juicy filling. Sloppy Joes were a lunchroom legend. They could be made in big batches, held warm without drying out, and dished out quickly to crowds of hungry kids. But beyond convenience, they brought a certain joy, a break from rigid routines, a reason to grab an extra napkin, and a reminder that even in the most ordinary settings, something simple could still be downright delicious. Macaroni with butter and salt. Can you still picture the glow of the TV reflecting off a chipped kitchen bowl late on a school night? That's how I remember it. A quiet moment, the house dim except for the screen, and a warm plate of buttered macaroni resting in my lap, like a reward for making it through the day. In the 1970s, not every meal needed to be fancy to feel special. For many working and middle-class families, the grocery budget had to stretch, and time was always running thin. But pasta was affordable, filling and comforting in all the right ways. A simple pot of macaroni, drained and dressed with a pat of butter and a sprinkle of salt, could calm the stomach and the spirit at once. No fancy sauces, no expensive cheese, just the essentials. It was the kind of dish even a tired kid could make alone, which made it all the more endearing. And while it might not have impressed dinner guests, it held a quiet place of honor in everyday life. Sometimes it's the meals that cost the least that stick with us the longest. Macaroni with butter and salt wasn't just food, it was reassurance in the simplest form possible. Hamburger gravy on bread. The scent of sizzling beef and onions in a well-worn skillet once signaled something simple but deeply satisfying. Dinner was almost ready. In kitchens where every dollar was stretched and nothing went to waste, hamburger gravy on bread was more than a meal. It was a practical kind of comfort. The method was humble. Ground beef, browned until the edges crisped just slightly, became the heart of the dish. Leftover vegetables, whatever was in the icebox or garden, were tossed in for depth and nourishment. Then came the roux, made with a spoonful of flour stirred into the pan's savory drippings, thickening the mixture into a rich, spoon-coating gravy. When ladled generously over slices of soft white bread, it transformed into something far greater than the sum of its parts. It was filling, warm, and ready in minutes, ideal for school lunches, quick suppers, or feeding a crowd on tight means. Especially during the leaner years of the 1970s, meals like this didn't just save money, they offered a sense of stability. Hamburger gravy on bread may have looked modest, but to many families, it tasted like survival, ingenuity, and love served on a plate. Beans on toast. The morning sun filtered through thin kitchen curtains, casting soft shadows over a plate of beans piled on toast, humble, hearty, and quietly dignified. In homes where the day started before dawn and ended long after dark, this meal held its own kind of poetry. Beans on toast may sound modest, but in the 1970s, especially across the working-class South, it was a morning ritual rooted in necessity. Canned beans were cheap, filling, and dependable. Bread was often homemade or bought day-old from the corner store. Butter, milk, even sugar. Those were luxuries saved for Sunday. I still remember watching my father slather warm baked beans over a thick slice of toast, handing me a fork before heading out to the fields. It was no-frills fuel, the kind of breakfast that filled you up and stuck with you. Beyond its practicality, though, this dish carried meaning. It told the story of families who made do, who worked hard, and who refused to waste a thing. In a way, it was a quiet declaration of pride. Though it rarely graces modern menus, beans on toast remains a nostalgic symbol, not of poverty, but of perseverance, and of a time when simplicity was a virtue, not a compromise. How many of these forgotten dinners have you actually tried? Let us know in the comments. Tastes may change, but memories like these never really fade. Which of these forgotten favorites would you bring back to your table? Let us know in the comments. And if this trip down memory lane stirred your appetite, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more nostalgia.